May I have your attention, please? Hello, good morning, good evening.
Yeah.
We're a little bit early, 30 seconds maybe. Take this time, please, to silence your electronic devices. That'd be great. My name is Jason Kelpie. I'm the town moderator. I've agreed to facilitate tonight's forum. Thank you all for being here. In addition to silencing your cell phones, please be aware that tonight's forum is being broadcast live on the Groton channel and will be available online, plus will be reshown on the Groton channel at later times. Tonight we'll have a presentation from the town manager of Groton, Mr. Mark Haddad, followed by a presentation on the Dunstable budget by town administrator from Dunstable, Mr. Jason Silva, and then a presentation on the school's budget with Dr. Laura Chesson and Sherry Kersey, who is the director of business over at the school. So thank you very much. And then we'll follow it up with Q&A, and I'm told these folks will stay as long as you have questions, but there are signs that say no overnight parking. Let's keep that in mind. So to kick it off, Mr. Haddad.
Thank you. Before I get into my budget presentation, there's been some confusion on the way that the whole town meeting election process works. So I figured I'd take a couple of seconds just to outline it. And there's an information pamphlet over on the table, too, that you can take afterwards. We've also posted it online. But basically, we've been working very cooperatively with the town of Dunstable and the Groton-Dunstable Regional School District. And our whole plan was to show cooperation going into the fiscal year 25 budget development, because we all are sharing the same issues and we're having the same concerns. So what we decided to do was do everything together, so that we have town meeting together, we have override elections together, and then that way people are all getting the same information at the same time. So we decided the best way to do this is to have a town meeting. We decided to set the town meeting date in March, and Dunstable set the date of March 26th to do a special town meeting to vote on their budget, and Groton wanted to do the same thing. Unfortunately, the Groton charter says that the budget can only be voted at the annual town meeting, at the annual spring town meeting. So we had to move our town meeting up. Usually it's the last week in April. We moved ours up to March 26th. We also decided that there would be an override election, and the override election is going to be on April 2nd. So what ends up happening is you go to town meeting on March 26th and you vote on the budget. Regardless of what happens with that budget, whether you support an override on that budget or not, the ballot question on April 2nd is going to go forward, because it is set in stone. Both the select board in Groton and the Board of Selectmen in Dunstable set that date. You do not need to have a town meeting vote to have an override. You can raise your levy anytime you want, but only town meeting can expend that levy. So what will end up happening is, if town meeting votes the budget that requires an override, and the override passes on April 2nd, the budget goes into effect July 1st and everything is all set. If town meeting votes the budget, but then the override fails, both Groton and Dunstable will have to go back to town meeting and reassess the budget to bring it in line with available levy capacity. What would be really interesting is if town meeting doesn't vote a budget that requires an override, and then the override passes. All that does is raise the levy, but it's not going to be expended, because only town meeting can set what the budget is. So I just want to be very, very clear to everybody that town meeting is going to happen in Groton and Dunstable on March 26th. It's a special town meeting in Dunstable, annual town meeting in Groton. And then there'll be an override election on April 2nd, in which we will be asking in Groton to raise the levy by $5.5 million to cover the next 3 years, and I believe Dunstable's $2.1 million for the next 3 years. What's really confusing a lot of people is Groton still has to have its annual election of officers. And our bylaw is very clear that says that the annual election of town officers happens on the fourth Tuesday after the first night of town meeting. Somebody really brilliant came up with that schedule, and that's what we have to follow. So because we moved our town meeting up to March 26th, the annual election of officers is going to happen on April 23rd in Groton. So it's a month earlier than it usually is. There are no override questions on that ballot. That is going to be when you elect select board members, Board of Health, Sewer Commission, School Committee, and things like that. But it will not, the override is going to happen on April 2nd in both Groton and Dunstable. I hope that clears up some of the confusion, but anybody that has a question after that, please contact me or Jason, and we'll try to explain it as best we can. But I apologize for the confusion. It is a confusing thing, but we're trying our best to get out as much information as possible. So there is a handout tonight on the table. This is also going to be posted on the town's website, and it also has the dates in which you have to register in order to participate. So if you want to participate in the March 26th town meeting in Groton, you need to register. If you're not already registered, you need to register by Friday, March 15th. If you want to vote in the special override election and you're not registered to vote, you need to do that by Saturday, March 23rd. And if you want to vote in the annual election, because we post that at the same time that we post the warrant, it's the same date as the town meeting, which is March 15th. So March 15th for the town meeting and the annual town election in Groton, March 23rd if you want to vote in the special override election if you're not already registered. I hope that clears up some of the confusion, and again, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has relative to that process, and I'm sure Jason would be more than happy to do that in Dunstable as well. You like how I volunteer you for work?
Great job.
Thank you. So that said,
Crystal clear.
Peter, do you have a question?
Point of order, Mr. Myron. I just,
Please use the
since
microphone.
we have a quorum of the Groton Select Board here, I'd just like to call that board to order. And there may be some other boards here that need to call themselves to order.
Are there other boards here that need to call themselves to order? Yes, Ms. Rayner.
And I need to call the Groton-Dunstable Regional School District School Committee to order.
Okay,
The town of Dunstable Select Board is called to order.
great. Anyone else? Very good. Mr. Haddad, please continue.
Thank you very much. So we'll get started with the presentation, advance 2 slides. So I'm just going to walk through the budget process, and I'm going to walk through why we are where we are. When I'm done, Jason is going to walk through the Dunstable process, and then Dr. Chesson and Sherry are going to walk through the Groton-Dunstable School District budget, and then we'll be more than happy to answer questions that you have. I'll try to go through this as quickly as possible. We will post this online. It is already posted online for anybody that wants to look at the numbers in more detail if it's hard to see on the screen, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. So for the fiscal year 25 budget process, we started earlier than usual. I appointed the Town Manager's TRICOM Working Group, and we began reviewing issues that surrounded the development of the fiscal year 25 budget in July of 2023. It's the earliest we've ever started the budget in Groton, in at least the 15 years I've been Town Manager. The working group conducted studies of comparable communities and school districts and determined that spending by the town and the school district was in line with those comparables. So we felt confident that our budgetary projections and the way we were managing the town of Groton and the Groton-Dunstable School District was in line with our comparable communities. We also developed revenue projections and expenditure assumptions based on the best information that was available at that time. What the outcome of the work showed was that Groton would be facing a deficit of $3.9 million in fiscal year 25. What are the issues that caused that? Well, the biggest issue is lack of sustained revenue sources. The allowed growth under Proposition 2.5 wasn't enough to keep up with inflationary budget pressures. Also, we have a lack of consistent and appropriate support from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and we are no longer receiving the federal aid and the federal funding that was used to balance the budget of the school district in fiscal years 22 and 23. That funding, the ESSER funding, the ARPA funding, and the CARES Act funding was no longer available to be used to make up for some of the budget shortfalls that we couldn't support through tax revenue and state aid. And then, of course, the use of the excess and deficiency fund by the Groton-Dunstable Regional School District was also putting them in a situation where they could not continue to do that to support their budget. So one of the things I want to talk about is the levy, because I want to explain the levy versus expenditures. So this graph that you see up on the chart on the screen shows the levy increase since fiscal year 2014 through fiscal year, the anticipated increase in fiscal year 25. Right now, we anticipate anywhere from 3% to 4.5% a year in tax revenue. That's all we get in tax revenue, between 3 and 4.5%. And if we can't generate more than that, we have to fit the budget, obviously, to meet that. And we've done it very successfully in Groton since 2003, which is the last time we had an override of Proposition 2.5. If you look at this next slide, you'll see one of the things that I said is that we do not get consistent or good aid from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. What you see here up on the screen is the net local aid funding that we get from the state and the net school funding that the school district gets from the state from fiscal 2015 to fiscal 2025. We average a 1.5% increase on the town side, and the district gets a 0.34% increase. What that means is the assessments to Groton and Dunstable have to be larger than they would ordinarily be because the state is not keeping up with the growth. So if their budget goes up 4%, which is a reasonable increase, the state is only contributing 0.34 for that, and the towns of Groton and Dunstable have to make up more of that assessment. So one of the things that we've been doing in Groton is we've been trying to look at our other revenue sources, our estimated receipts, to see what we could do to generate more revenue. So what you see here up on the screen since 2016 is some of our major estimated receipts and the things that we've tried to do to generate more money to offset that lack of state aid and the minimal amount of money that we get from the amount of money we get from tax revenue, that 3 to 4.5%. You can see our local meals tax has increased 101%. Our local room occupancy tax has gone up almost 300%. Our excise taxes has gone up about 16%. Pilots from our nonprofit partners have really increased, has gone up 54% over that time period. Our fees have gone up 10%. Licenses and permits, our building permits and the like, have gone up 119%. And our country club, after many years of taxpayer subsidy, our country club revenues have gone up, and it is self-sufficient. It is actually making a profit and returning it to the general fund. This next chart shows the growth of the budget, both the school district and the town over the last, since fiscal year 2015. And I thought that was very interesting for you to see how the growth rates. This next chart, I think, is the most important chart to explain the problem that we're having. It shows the percentage of levy increase each year, which is that first chart that I showed you, versus the percentage of expenditure increase, including what we have to do each year with the Groton-Dunstable Regional School District. You'll see the two highlighted years of 21 and 22 where we pretty much broke even. That's because we had that federal funding to help offset that. But you can see every year the percentage of levy increase is lower than the expenditure increase. And the expenditures are the personnel costs that we have, salaries, expenses, health insurance, pensions, things like that, things that we really can't control in terms of expenses, but we have to somehow come up and find funding for that. Since fiscal year 2003 in the town of Groton, we have found a way to balance the budget without an override of Proposition 2.5. Unfortunately, fiscal year 25, the magic that we've been able to pull off to do that isn't there. So to balance the fiscal year 25 budget, the working group determined that an override of Proposition 2.5 would be required to meet the expenses of the town and the school district, or we would face substantial cuts in the respective operating budgets. So what we decided to do was figure out what a level service budget would be. And the definition of a level service budget is a budget that is the same exact services that you have in fiscal year 24 for fiscal year 25. No new positions, no new expenses, unless they're required to maintain the services that you have. In the town of Groton, for the municipal budget, and Sherry and Laura will get into the school budget, we did not add anything. As a matter of fact, we made reductions, and I'll get into that in a minute on what we did to try to lower the impact. So when we started to build the level services budget, what you see up on the screen is some of the assumptions that we had to make. The fiscal year 24 budget had $245,000 left over that we could spend for fiscal year 25. Fiscal year 24 new growth came in at $564,000, which really helped allow us to be $250,000 under the levy limit. In fiscal 25, we weren't anticipating as much new growth, so we estimated it at $20 million, not the $36 that we had the year before, and that brought in about $300,000. The proposed operating budget anticipated a slight increase in state aid based on the governor's budget that she released on January 30th. And then we are anticipating a modest increase in our estimated receipts, some of those things that I just showed you before. Based on all of that, we anticipated about 3.17% in new revenues for fiscal 25. And that's what we have in the bucket to fund both the town of Groton's operating budget and the proposed operating assessment of the Groton-Dunstable Regional School District. So the town and the school district took steps to reduce the anticipated FY25 deficit. And some of the things that we did is Groton-Dunstable Regional School District decided instead of stopping E&D all at once, they would phase it out over several years, which would help us lower the assessment to the towns of Groton and Dunstable. And they would also slow and phase in how they would eliminate paying for full-day kindergarten. In the town of Groton and the town of Dunstable, the select boards voted to join the Patriot Regional Emergency Communications Center, which in Groton saved a substantial amount of money, as it did in Dunstable, and we're still providing the same level of services. And because the state likes regionalization in that area, they would cover the town's expenses or the town's cost of doing that for the next 3 years at 100%, and then wean off over the next 2 years at 50% and 25%. That was a major savings to help us bridge the gap in FY25. And then the select board voted to join Maya for health insurance, which also saved us some money in the budget for next year. Excuse me. We also scrubbed revenues and found additional revenues that were over the original estimate of the working group, and we made minor miscellaneous adjustments to the budget. This next screen shows you the savings that we got in by doing that, and we reduced the original $3.9 million deficit to $1.7 million. And the important thing to note is it's still based on a level services budget. But we made changes within that level service budget to try to lower that deficit, and we were successful by going from 3.9 to 1.7. The school district adjusted their assessment by 1.4. Regional dispatch saved us $464,000. Health insurance saved us $117 from the projection. Neshoba Tech came in lower than we had anticipated. Our new revenues and miscellaneous budget adjustments got us down to that $1.7 million. Looking at this next chart goes into a little bit more detail. By joining Maya, our health insurance budget will only go up 3.38%. In fiscal year 24, it went up 13.5%. So we were able to lower the growth on our health insurance budget. Our pension budget to Middlesex County, we have no choice but to pay that. That went up 6.36%. So we had a budget that $158,000. Employee contractual costs would increase $231,000, but that gets offset by some of the savings that we did with moving to regional dispatch. Our excluded debt for projects that have been excluded, this building, the Center Fire Station, the DPW garage, the library roof, and the Florence Roach Elementary School is going up $300,000 next year. And of course, we feel very confident that the country club will continue to maintain and cover all their expenses and return money to the general fund, which helps our free cash situation. Due to a decrease in cable revenues, we're proposing to eliminate the cable enterprise in FY25 and make it a town department. We think that's important because cable, they're here tonight broadcasting this. They do a great job getting information out to our residents and people interested in what's going on. And you don't need cable to access our cable channel. You can do it over the internet anywhere in the world. If you're on a business trip and you really want to know what the Groton Select Board is saying, you can watch it thanks to the cable channel. I know you all do that all the time. So we're going to make it a town department, and we're going to use free cash for the first year to cover that expense, and then in the following years we're going to have a thing called the Cable Receipts Reserve for Appropriation account, where the fees that we get from Verizon and Spectrum will go into that account, and it'll be used as an offset in the budget. And of course, there are no major initiatives in fiscal year 25. It's a level services budget. This next chart shows you what the level service budget is. You see the municipal budget for the various departments is only going up 2.23% because, as I said, we're doing everything we can to control costs on the municipal side. Our overall budget, when you factor in excluded debt for the various projects, our overall budget's going up 2.91%. What's hitting us hard is a 26% increase from Neshoba Tech. The Groton-Dunstable, which we'll get into a little bit more detail, our assessment is going up 10%. And again, a lot of that is driven by the state and the lack of sufficient state funding. The overall budget's going up 6.8%. So based on a set of assumptions, including our anticipated increase in the assessment from the school district, anticipated salary increases to our unions, historical increases in health insurance and pension costs, and the average increases in expenses over the last 5 years, I'm estimating that we would need we would have a $5.5 million deficit over the next 3 fiscal years. This next chart shows you how that deficit arrived. We were estimating a $1.7 million deficit in fiscal year 25. If we don't get new revenues and we just have the normal 2.5% increase and we keep level services, we will have a $3.6 million deficit cumulative over 2 years, and then that grows to $5.5 million over 3 years. So the town manager, in consultation with the finance committee and the select board, proposed an override of $5.5 million to cover the anticipated 3-year deficit. And this next chart shows you that when you do that, you see we'd have a slight surplus of $357,000 after that 3-year period. How that money would get spent on this next chart shows you we'd need $1.7 million in FY25 of the $5.5 million. We need $1.8 million in FY26 and $1.7 million in FY27, which leaves us a balance of $212,000. The reason that previous chart showed you $357,000 $457,000 is because by raising the full $5.5 million in the first year, we get the benefit of 2.5% growth, and it'll allow us to stretch out that potentially to a fourth year. So that's a real important thing, and that's one of the main reasons we're asking for all of the money up front and spread it out over 3 years so that we get the benefit of that added 2.5 on the levy, which helps us. In fiscal year 25, if we don't do an override of Proposition 2.5, the average tax bill would go up $306 based on the levy and another $63 based on the excluded debt that's previously been approved, for an increase of $366. The override that we would use, $1.7 million, if it's successful, would add $431, and the average tax bill, which is a home value at $695,000, would go up $799. This next chart shows you the impact over the 3 years. The override would account for $431 the first year, $480 the second year, $438 the third year, and then the average tax bill on that lower chart would go up $799, as I just explained, $988, and then $702 in FY27. That factors in all of our existing excluded debt, the remaining money that we have left to borrow for the Florence Roach Elementary School, and the PFAS debt that was approved in the fall. This next chart, it's hard to see, but if I try to blow out the actual impact on this so you can see what the impacts are with the override and with the other things added in each year, and what the increase is and what the cost is on a monthly basis. Again, this is posted on the website, so anybody that wants to see that can see it on the website. And I'm going to say this 1,000 times tonight. Anybody with a question, please either call me at my office or email me at townmanager@grotonma.gov. So we would have to balance the budget if the override doesn't pass. So to balance it, I propose we must reduce the budget by that $1.7 million. Under previous practice, to eliminate the deficit, Groton-Dunstable has absorbed 60% of the deficit, while the town absorbs 40%. That would mean a 3.57% reduction to Groton-Dunstable District, which is $1 million to Groton. But keep in mind, when they cut Groton, they have to cut Dunstable as well. So that $1 million translates to a little bit more than that, and they'll get into that in more detail in a bit. And then the town would have to cut $684,000 out of its proposed budget. And keep in mind, the town's budget, the level services budget, exclusive of debt, is only going up 2.23%, or $365,000. So to make a $684,000 cut, we would have to cut into current services that we're offering this year. So this next chart shows where we would make those reductions. We would have to cut general government by 2.35%. We would have to cut public safety by 4.92%. We'd have to cut the Department of Public Works by 7.8%. And we would cut the library and citizen services by 4.6%. And then there'd be a reduction to employee benefits because there would be layoffs involved, and we would cut that another 2.2%, or $114,000. Those are the impacts. Specific cuts are going to be determined through consultation between the department heads and the Finance Committee, because the Finance Committee has a final say on what goes into the various line items. We would work with them to figure out exactly what would get cut. But when you cut $680,000 out of a budget that only went up $365,000, you are seeing a cuts to existing services within the budget. This last chart, I think, is really, really important. It shows we're not alone. There are other communities around us that are going through the same thing. Westford, Andover, Chelmsford, Drake, Acton, Sudbury, Ashby, Belmont, Georgetown, Pepperell, of course, Dunstable, Norton, and Millis. They're all facing the same things that we're facing to various degrees, and I know they're all considering overrides next year. State aid is not helping us, and I think that's the largest problem that we're facing. So I appreciate the time. I hope I did not go on too long. I set the stage for you. Did I go on too long? Perfect. Perfect? Excellent. So thank you very much. When all the presentations are done, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. But right now, I will turn it over to Mr. Silva. Thank you, Jason.
Mr. Jason Silva, the Town Administrator for Dunstable.
All yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. Jason Silva, the Town Administrator in Dunstable. I've been in Dunstable for about a year. I think most of you are from Groton, so I'm going to do my best to move quickly, but I'm happy to answer any questions or receive any comments you might have after the end of the presentation. So before I go into 25, I just wanted to quickly review FY24, this current fiscal year. the town of Dunstable actually went for a municipal override to fund our operating budget for FY24, and it failed. So this budget we're in right now, we've had to reduce. It was about $300,000 override. So we've lost a police officer position this fiscal year. We've lost a per diem firefighter position this fiscal year. So what that means is those are the major impacts. We also had to reduce a number of other departments, but those two things were the most significant impact. What that means is we have one police officer on the overnight shift now, and we only have one firefighter on during the day shift. Next slide. Go ahead. So Mark covered this, so I'm not going to go in detail, but we kind of mirrored the town of Groton in the school district's budget process this year for the first time. So we started much, much earlier than we typically do, primarily because we knew that we were going to be up against it financially, so we wanted to get a head start on it and have more of a seat at the table during these early discussions. So we worked with the town of Groton and the school district to create a working group, initially just of Dunstable, but as time went on, we merged both working groups to try to get on the same page with regard to each of our operational budgets. Next slide, please. You can keep going. So the town of Dunstable's budget is 65% schools, 35% town operations. What that translates in is slightly less than $5 million on the town side and about $9 million on the regional school districts assessments. These are the increases we're seeing this year. So the regional school districts are going up $805,000. Total town operating is going up $136,000. That's roughly slightly less than 3% on the town side and about 10% overall on the school side. Our revenue, just like most communities, is primarily generated through real estate taxes. 86% is through our levy. Our levy without the override is going up about 3.5%. But our major revenue sources is the same as Groton. Local receipts is about $750,000 annually to the town of Dunstable, primarily motor vehicle excise. And our cherry sheet receipts through, that's our state aid money, has gone up about 3% for FY25. This is just a breakdown of what our tax levy is made up. So it's 2.5 plus new growth plus our excluded debt. And within this graphic is $763,000, which is our general fund override number for FY25. This is just a comparison between our expenditure increases and levy increases from 22 to 25. And you see, starting in FY23, our expenditure increases exceed our levy increases. In fact, in FY25, our projected increase is about double what our levy increase is expected to be. And again, just like the town of Groton, we're seeing very minimal growth in state aid and local receipts. Actually, in state aid, you're seeing more growth in local receipts. But our local receipts are generally flat, where those two revenue sources combined, we're seeing a 1.4% average annual increase over that time period. So one thing different for us is we're using free cash to balance our budget every year. That's basically our savings account. So we're using our savings account to close our budget gap between expenditures and revenues annually. So in FY25, we're trying to reduce our reliance on, the lights went out. Someone get up and dance. So in FY25, we're trying to reduce our reliance on that savings account by $100,000. And over the 3-year period we're seeking an override, we'll continue that trend. So some major budget changes that we're seeing in FY25. The first one is we've tried during this fiscal year to really look at savings because we knew we had some budget challenges ahead of us. So we've regionalized a number of services for in FY24. Our treasurer collector and town clerk functions we have regionalized with the town of Pepperell. So we're sharing a treasurer collector and town clerk position with the town of Pepperell. And we've also looked to regionalize our dispatch the same as the town of Groton. Oh, back one, please. Thank you. No. So we're also, the positions we were forced to cut in FY24 because the override failed, we're seeking to restore those public safety positions, both the overnight police officer position and the per diem firefighter position during the day. Some of the major increases we're seeing are employee related, so pension and health insurance. Our pension just shy of 6%. In our health insurance, we're planning for a 5% increase. And our general liability insurance, based on our conversations with our provider, we're planning on a 10% increase. So this is a summary of some other miscellaneous variances that we've been forced to make. Board of Health assessments for both public nurse and we have a regional Board of Health, and the Neshoba Associated Boards of Health. Fire expenses consistently go up higher than other departments. Our IT budget went up by 24%. We had to bid a new contract, and that's the cost of the new contract. Library expenses have increased, although the overall budget increase is consistent with prior years. We've had to reallocate one of our assistant accountant position, reallocate her salary, so you see some variations within the department. That position salary is allocated. Council on Aging has been reduced slightly, and in the town administrator budget, the training line has been increased by $3,000 based on my contract. Next slide. So when the town of Dunstable received the projected increases from Groton-Dunstable Regional School District, we thought it'd be a good idea to start forecasting our increases because we knew those increases over that 3-year term were not going to be sustainable within our existing tax levy. So because of that, we updated our forecast. These are the assumptions. Essentially 2% salary increases across the board, general expenses of 1%, and then contract services, energy, utilities, and maintenance of buildings, 3% increases. So all in for FY25, we're expecting we projected a $763,000 deficit. And for 26, it's $755,000. 2027 is $555,000 based on those projections. And based on the school assessment, estimated increases of 10% in 26 and 8.15 in 27. So these are the projected increases per year for the schools in the town. And that's just the 1, 2, and 3 year override. It totals $2.074 million. So we have not gone through the exercise that the town of Groton has gone through in terms of where the cuts are going to happen if the override fails. However, this slide does give you an idea of the magnitude of our deficit. Our general government expenses, all in, every single one of them is $633,000, and our deficit's $763,000. All of our human services, library, recreation expenses are $397,000. Highway department budget $577,000. So just for comparison's sake, the idea of making up $763,000 on the municipal side of the budget would be very, very difficult, to say the least. Next slide, please. So the override impacts tax increases to the residents of Dunstable. So without the override, generally people would see about $330 annual increase, slightly over that average. Over the 3 years, it would be $1,050. The override impacts over the 3 years would be slightly under $1,700. And so all in over the 3 years, FY '25, '26, and '27, the total average single-family tax increase in Dunstable would be $2,750 roughly. So what if without the override, how would we deal with the deficit? So there are a number of options that the town of Dunstable has not decided on how they would prefer to handle it. One is to proportionally assign the bottom line deficit of $763,000, which I think that's how the town of Groton historically has dealt with that. We could also look at the new available revenue that the town has and assign that 65-35, or the other option of having one side or the other eat the entire deficit. And this is a really, really wordy slide that breaks that down for you. But what I will say is that the range of the deficit for the school district is 763 to 496, which, remember, we're only 23% of the overall spend on the Groton-Dunstable Regional School District side. And for the town, it would be 763 to $73,000. Slide. Okay, and I just have one quick slide on future planning, because there's clearly, we've forecasted out 3, 4, 5 years, but in this override request is to cover a 3-year period. But once that 3 years is up, what do we do? So there's been a lot of conversation within town of how do we plan for that 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th year. And so the select board has taken a proactive approach and created an economic development committee, land use committee, master plan implementation committee. We know that one of the key things to look at and consider is how to generate additional revenue elsewhere. So those committees actually have met for the first time. 2 of the 3 have met for the first time the last couple of weeks, and are fortunately, we're lucky to have eager volunteers ready to work on those items and make recommendations back to the select board on ideas to increase economic development potentially, and look at how we're using town-owned land and if there are other options to consider. I think that's it. Thank you very much. Next is, okay.
Yeah, for the Groton-Dunstable School District, Ms. Kersey.
Yes. Hi, I'm Sherry Kersey. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations for the school district. We gave this presentation last week in Dunstable, and based on some feedback, we have more visuals. It's the same information, but instead of being words and bullets, we've put pictures. So hopefully this will be better. What does our budget consist of? We've been saying that 75% of it is salaries and benefits. Here you can see those 2 areas of the pie chart, with the next biggest expense being our out-of-district tuitions, which we talk about often, and everything else, contract services, is next. Next slide. Just looking at what our current budget is in FY24 to FY25, we are proposing a 7.29% increase in operating. Next. Looking at a 5-year historical, what has been the increase? We want to illustrate in the green when it's FY22 and 23. That's when we had available grant funding from the CARES Act and ESSER and ARPA money. So we used that money first and asked the towns for less. You can see where that money ran out and where we are escalating up. So for dollar-wise, you can see that, but just to illustrate the percentage increase, it's been like a 3.74, 4.71, then in the ARPA years, 2.37. This current year is a 6.39 with a 7.29 projected for next year. Next. The considerations that why did the budget go up so much. The salary projections, we are currently negotiating with 2 bargaining units right now, and as well as doing market corrections. Our health insurance, we have a 10% placeholder for that. We should be getting our renewal this week, so hopefully that'll be good news. This year's budget has $100,000 more in utilities for PFAS because the school district is required by the DEP to provide testing on area wells as well as our own, and in areas where the PFAS levels reach a certain amount, we either have to provide them drinking water or in some cases filtration systems. So until the school is hooked up to town water, we have this $100,000 expenditure in the budget for next year. And it's something that we're doing this year as well. We just didn't have the time to budget for it this year, so we're doing a lot of budget shifting to cover those expenses this year. We are watching the way that the assessment is done for Groton and Dunstable is based on a 5-year rolling average of the student population. We are seeing and have seen a trend that the population in Dunstable changes, gets higher slightly every year. So as the assessment is being computed for Dunstable, that will be getting more and more proportionally over trending out in more years. And the change in the local minimum contribution by the state, and there'll be a slide in here where I'll show that the state actually comes and they determine how much the town's ability to pay is, and that is the minimum that they are required to spend with the district. Our school district is above minimum, and that's where the regional agreement comes in place, and the 5-year rolling average to apply the additional assessment is then added. Next. This is what were the major drivers for this. We started talking about this. So there's actually 2 ways that the assessment can go up. It's either we have less revenue someplace else, and thus we have to ask the towns for more. That's happening. And then our expenses go up in a greater value than the inflation. So this year we are using less E&D, which is our free cash per se, our savings account. This current year we're using $911,000. We have knocked that down to $500,000. So what that means is, how do you come up with that revenue? Our only other spot is to ask it in an assessment. So proportionally, it's about, of that $400,000 that we don't use from our savings, $300,000 more we need to ask from Groton, and $100,000 more we have to ask from Dunstable. We have, instead of adding $350,000 in full-day kindergarten expenses, which would eliminate the fee, we've only added $100,000 back with a plan to add it over 3 years for a lesser impact year over year. We have anticipated new positions, which will be talked about in another slide. Estimated wages and salary increases are a bulk of the increase for this year. It's $1.9 million. Health insurance, again, is a great, at 10% for the active group is over $700,000. And then utilities, again, that becomes a major factor because of the $100,000 increase for the PFAS. Next. The positions that we're looking, we've been talking about these 4.4 FTEs. That's how we count the full-time equivalents. We will be posting and filling before June 30th, a behavior interventionist. But what we're going to be doing is there's a current BCBA position in the budget, in the current budget, that we will not be filling. So we will be exchanging that at this point. And because we are for compliance reasons, we need to add another ELL teacher. In exchange, we will be reducing one of our team chair positions that are currently in this year's budget to fund that. And then after the new year, when we have a change of superintendent, if the override is successful, we will be adding a one full-time equivalent of a maintenance position, which we had always anticipated doing for the new Briggs building because of the square footage. We also had not filled a vacancy 2 years ago, knowing that this was going to come back. There's a second grade teacher that we are going to try to restore. This particular class was a smaller class in kindergarten. We made the decision back then to go down one class. Now with the 150 students coming over from Swallow, not all of those are in second grade, but there will be, we'll have to see what the class sizes are. And there very well be the need to add back that class size. I mean, that class, so that the class size stays manageable. And then 0.4 FTE administrative assistant, we currently have 1.6. With the additional students, we will be making the part-time person a full-time. So how do we fund the school? And this, again, is just an illustration of the burden that is being placed on both towns. So we have our projected budget, and then we subtract what our estimated receipts from federal, state, and a few things that the school district raises money for, like interest income, some Medicaid reimbursement. That's about it. And then whatever, then there's a balance. Then we have to take the minimum contribution, as I was explaining before, that the state says each town has to pay. And then whatever's left over gets split between by the regional agreement. So again, with state funding not keeping up with inflation, only going up 0.34, the deficit for that falls to be portioned back to the towns. Just this, I've been pushing this whole year. Our budget is going up. You saw 7.23. I'm sorry, 0.29. But the assessments to the towns have gone up 10% and 11%. And so that seems like it doesn't balance. But there is a difference between why our budget is only up 7%, because that includes all of our expenses. So those are the things that we've already gone through and what types of expenses can increase. And then the assessment, again, is what we need to charge the schools, the towns, to pay for their school districts. So if there is a change in balance of any of the three pots of money that we have, it's falling to the town. Next. This is just a slide to show from this year to anticipate for next year what the change. You can see it's slightly going over to Dunstable, but when you're even doing a small percentage of a $50 million budget, that can be substantial. Next. This is just a visual to show you the increases in both Groton and Dunstable on what the assessments have been and what we're expecting. Again, in Dunstable, their assessment is expected to go up 11.73, and in Groton 10.81 for next year if the override is successful. And as both towns have pointed out, this is not a one-year problem. We always provide the towns with a 5-year assessment outlook, and we know that we're going to have the same problem again in FY26 and FY27.
Before I start to answer the question about what happens if the override vote isn't successful for the schools, I want to talk first about one thing that Sherry mentioned, and that is about the new positions that we've already had in the budget. So Mark touched on the fact that we had made changes to our budget, to try to keep the override as low as possible. And one of the things that we've just done recently, if we have two positions that have come open because of one in a change in personnel and one because someone has resigned. And that was the team chair position and the BCBA position. And what we did was we said, okay, for right now, until the new superintendent comes in July, we will fund those positions based on the not replacing positions that were already in the budget for this year, which will make an impact if the superintendent decides in July that they're not going to fill those two positions. Additionally, there are other positions, as we touched on the second grade teacher, and also on the maintenance person, that as we close the year end, as we look at data for the end of the year, we may or may, the new superintendent may or may not continue to fund those positions. I bring this up because I wanted to demonstrate, because we get a lot of questions about our commitment to staying within the budget that's been set for the next 3 years if the override passes. And I wanted to use this to demonstrate that we have in fact done work before. We actually did work right before we began to present on the budgets, because Dunstable's local minimum contribution went up, but we met with Jason, and Jason asked us to please see if we could try to keep his assessment the same, even though his local minimum contribution went up, because as you saw from Sherry's slide, we take the money that we need, and then we subtract whatever revenues we get, and then we look at the local minimum contribution, and that comes off the top, and then we do the assessments. So that's one of the things that Jason asked us to do, and we did do that. So I want to emphasize that to say that the senior staff, and I'm sure the new superintendent, is committed to staying within the budget that's been set for the next 3 years or less if the override passes. So I really wanted to just emphasize that. Going on to the next slide, please. So none of the options that we're going to discuss tonight or the things that the reductions we're going to look at are without significant impact to our students. Each of the principals, and these suggestions from reduction came from the principals and from the directors of each of the areas. And we talked about what was the thing that you wanted to protect, or what is the thing that you would be most likely to take the reductions from. And so at the high school, they really had a number of cuts last year. They lost 4 or 5 teachers last year at the high school, plus a guidance counselor, plus the assistant principal. So they really wanted to try to protect their staffing numbers as much as possible, and so they looked at other sources of reductions in order to meet what their target was. At the elementary schools, they really wanted to keep the classroom teacher numbers as safe as possible, and so they looked at other areas for reduction. And at the middle school, they spread that reduction across the board. Next slide. So where were we? This slide, you'll see that in 2004 and 2005, the district had cut all the stipends for curriculum coordinators and reduced the maintenance staff to 4 staff to cover what we have. And there was actually a study that was done in 2017, I believe, by the Abrams Group that said we were understaffed in this area. Then you'll see that in 2009, the decision was made that all certified librarians would be reduced, and sorry, I can't read that from here. The district cut 2.5 reading specialist. And one of the things is that the ELA standards for the state were updated in 2010, and the district did not have the funding until 2012 in order to meet those needs. And you'll see the other cuts that happened in 2016. And I'm sure you're having trouble reading this because I'm having trouble reading it, and I'm right on top of it. I apologize. Next slide, please. So where we are, the green is, let's just use instead of the specific items, at least look at the visual. So the green are things that have been restored from 2018 until last year. And last year, you see there's a lot of red. There were a lot of cuts. There's over $1.9 million between use of more excess and deficiency and cuts that happened across the district in order to try to balance the budget in efforts to try not to come forward for an override last year. And we were able to do it, but with significant impact. And I think most people will remember that we had a number of budget meetings where there was a great deal of emotion regarding the cuts that had to happen. Next slide, please. So where are we going? The next part of this presentation will outline what the reductions will have to be. And the following information should be reviewed with the understanding that the proposed FY25 budget is level services. There are no new programs or services were recommended. So let me give you an example. We do not have a computer science program at the high school. I wish we did, but we don't. If we were to put in 3 courses in computer science so students could get certified to be Microsoft engineers, because that happens at some high schools, that would be a new program, but we're not doing that because it's a level services. At the middle school, we have always had foreign language. This year we decided to have 1 exposure to Spanish and 1 exposure to Latin. That was because our Latin numbers at the high school, which we have always offered Latin and Spanish, those Latin numbers were low. So we hoped that if we exposed kids to Latin with a phenomenal teacher at the middle school, that then more kids would take Latin at the high school. But we've always offered world languages at the middle school. So that was not a new program. That was a level services budget. So that's the difference. Sometimes it gets a little confusing between level services budget and non-level service. Next slide, please. The reduction targets. So this was done by... we looked at central office and we took, actually that says 1.1, it's actually $1.4 million off the top that we came out from central office, the reductions, and we'll talk in a minute about what those are. Then we apportioned the remaining deficit to each of the schools based on their percentage of enrollment in the district. And you can see each of the targets that were given to the schools. Next slide, please. So let's just summarize the impacts, and out on our website is the detail that I presented on February 14th, if you want the great level of detail. So there's a reduction of 7 high school teachers, and that will bring class sizes. This is when they spread it across, okay, trying to keep their. So the 7 high school teachers, several were from last year, and 3 are from this year. High school teachers, so we're expecting that the class sizes will reach at 30 to 31 from about 22 is the average right now. There will be a reduction of electives. Study halls will take place in place of some classes because we won't have places for kids to go. And there may be a reduced ability for students to develop a competitive college application. At the middle school, the principal has said that to meet the reduction target, they would have to cut 9 teachers. That would, again, bring class sizes to 30 to 31 from an average of 24 to 25. And those are the areas that would be cut, along with cuts in 5th and 6th grade, which means that we may not be able to still absorb the team structure that is very important to middle school students. And students may have to go into minimally supervised study halls. There will be significant reductions across general education supports, which we feel is going to have impact to students on MCAS. And we look at that from our DIBELS and our IXL assessments and student achievement, and significant reduction in behavioral and social emotional supports combining large class sizes. So if you have a negative, then you would end up with a negative learning environment in K through 12. Next slide. So the high school is also talking about increasing athletic fees, and an increase in athletic fees to $700 per sport with no family cap. That would probably result in a decrease in students' ability to participate in sports. $400 in activity fees would also result in a decrease in students in chamber choir or robotics, and also could result in students with less extracurriculars, which help students to develop competitive applications. Next slide. We would see a decrease in special education team chairs because one of the reductions would be an additional team chair on top of the reduction that we've already made this year. That would equal a reduction in school and family communication. Right now, team chairs communicate with families on a much more regular basis, but they're only required by law to communicate with them once a year. I'm not sure exactly what the target would be, but it would be definitely closer to the 1 time a year. There would be a decrease in related service providers. That would result in services being provided with students' IEPs in larger groups. So right now, if we have we have two groups of students that might be getting IEP services in group of 3, they might be combined to be a group of 6. They would still get their services, but it would be less than optimal situations. There would be also a decrease in related service providers and special education teachers would mean there would be less group for IEP services, thus impacting scheduling options. Right now, we really try hard not to take students, particularly at the elementary school, out of their general education classrooms in order to give them services. So if a student needs special education reading services or even general education reading services, we try to have them in the classroom for the mini lesson that comes at the beginning of the day or of the reading block, and then they're pulled out for services. So they get both the tier 1 and the tier 2 and 3 or special education services. We may not be able to do that. There would be a decrease in special education related service providers, counselors, and nurses would also not allow for faculty to communicate and collaborate on the support of students. And a delay in increasing our ELL staffing could end up with noncompliance if we, by the state, if we get more than 1 or 2 more ELL students. Next slide. In terms of across the board, we're talking about cutting a technology person that would result in an increase in mean time to repair. We're talking about cutting of a maintenance person. We just finally reached last week, I think, our the level we were supposed to be at for maintenance people. So we would not hire that additional maintenance person that we're right now forecasting to need for Florence Roach, which means that things wouldn't get repaired. And decrease in administrative assistance support in central office doesn't sound like a lot, but that would mean slower processing in terms of Medicare claims, which is vitally important to funding special education. Problems with student registration, ordering of district supplies. A lot of supplies get ordered at the district level and then get apportioned out. Resolution of health insurance claims, onboarding of new staff, distribution of reports to DESE, parents and teachers, and one of the most important things, reduction in our ability to process grant applications. Next slide. So is this just, we've said that this is just not for FY25, but in fact, we're projecting that based on what the towns are telling us that we would have a deficit of 1.8 million in the FY26 and 1.4 million in FY27. And you can see the amounts of money that would have to be cut from central office, high school, middle school, Florence Roach, and Swallow Union. Next slide. Okay, one of the things that's missing here is one of the things that we have looked at is the possibility of having to close Butwell and move those students to Swallow Union. The reason it's not on this slide is because we're not really even sure whether that's going to save money. It would result in money if we sold that building, and that would be one-time funds that could be used to decrease capital assessments, but may not result in a savings because of the amount of work that might have to be done at Swallow Union in order to support the students that are little ones at the preschool. And these are the important upcoming dates, and now we can take questions.
Great, thank you very much. As at town meeting, if you have questions, I'd ask that you line up at the microphone, and we'll go one at a time. Yes, ma'am.
So everyone will be relieved to hear that I do not have a question, but I had several conversations today with Margaret Scarsdale, a representative who had hoped to be here tonight. That was her plan. Apparently yesterday a new bill regarding migrant funding was introduced, and they have been voting starting at noon. They were still hot and heavy in voting as of 6 o'clock when I talked to her last, so she had hoped to be here, but I'll talk to her tomorrow and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Phil Francisco from Bridge Street here in Groton. Just a question to follow up on the comments that you made, Mark, about the impacts if the override doesn't pass on municipal works. This is a 3-year override we're talking about, and there's certainly a compounding of effects that would happen in second and third year. Could you make some kind of commentary about what would be the impact on municipal work in the second and third year of this process too.
Yeah, we did an exercise on what the impact would be if the override doesn't pass, and looking at the projections that I put together, we would have to cut another $700,000 out of the municipal budget in '26, and I think, Bud, another about 700,000 in fiscal year 20. Yeah, so that would be devastating to the cuts. That you would really cut deep into services at the library, police, fire. Town Hall, we have really done a good job over the last several years reducing positions at Town Hall. We've gone from 26 full-time equivalents to 19 already, and we are really at a place where we'd be down to less than one-person departments, and it would be really difficult to provide the services that we have. I was talking to the treasurer-collector today, and just what's going on in that office alone, if they lose more service, it would be very difficult for them to collect taxes, and if we can't collect taxes, we can't pay our bills. So the cuts would really start getting devastating in fiscal years 26 and 27. People may look, and I've seen commentary out there that, you can survive the cuts in fiscal year 25. They'd be hurt. We'd be losing school resource officers. We'd be losing call firefighters. We'd be hitting the library pretty hard. And DPW would take a beating in fiscal year 2025. But 26 and 27, it would just be much, much worse.
Yeah, thanks. Jason, I don't know if you could comment on the same thing for Dunstable. I think it's important everyone hears that too.
Yeah. We're already at less than one person per department. So, and that's the truth. So any reduction would be, I don't want to say impossible, because we're already making things work the best we can with very limited resources, but any, yeah, I mean, any reduction would be very difficult for us to absorb. We certainly wouldn't be able to restore our public safety departments in a way that I think collectively we believe is necessary to keep the community safe and, frankly, keep our employees safe who are responding to emergencies. But anything, like I said, all our departments have less than one full-time person staffing them.
Yes, as you were going through your presentation, my sort of read on what you were saying was the second and third year become impossible, not just difficult. They become impossible.
Yeah, I guess it all depends on what the increase on the school side is, and how much we have to absorb, which I'm guessing may change if the override doesn't pass to some extent. But yeah, there would be serious consequences, I think, on the town side.
Thank you.
I have to say that that's also the case for the school side. We're estimating a reduction of 10 staff in year FY26 and 10 staff in FY27.
Good evening.
Yes, sir.
My name is Rohit Basin. I'm over at Cherry Tree Lane in Groton. My question is on the school side of things, having a 6-year-old that's in Flowro and getting ready to go into the new building here. Is there a contingency plan if the budget override fails? For instance, will you guys present a revised budget with maybe a 25 to 35% cut? And if so, how will that proposed budget be prioritized, especially for non-student facing roles?
Okay, we've actually started to take a look at that because we feel like that's our due diligence. I'm not prepared to address that yet because it's only looked at by the senior staff. But as you saw from the slide before, we've actually proportionally taken way more from non-student facing roles. If you go back to the previous. Oh, yeah, there's too many slides to go back. Go forward again. I'm sorry, I'm driving her crazy. All right, so we cut $1.4 million off of central office. You saw that number earlier. Now, those weren't all non-student facing roles because very few people in central office or in the district don't ever work with students, right? So one of the cuts that you saw that's under central office is the behavioral interventionist. That person is going to be working in schools with students, but it's a central office. It's a district-wide resource. We can send them that person around the school. Another cut would be not bringing on a new ELL teacher. That comes out of central office, but that's because it's a district-wide resource. So there are very few people, and even the K through 4 literacy coordinator, who was one of the cuts, by the way, if we don't, if the override fails, works with students and teachers all the time. The K through 8 person we left in there because our math scores are not as strong as our reading and language arts scores are. So that was a toss-up. And also we felt that the assistant superintendent, her area of expertise is probably more in literacy than math. So we had to make some trade-offs like that. But these are the reductions that would happen if we didn't have anything in 26 and 27. Now, we can go back and look at that budget, but when you're talking about $3.3 million, there's no way that, I mean, you have to have a superintendent by law, you have to have a special education director by law, and you have to have a business manager by law. Those are the only things in central office that you have to have by law. But even we one day we sat down and we joked, you could get rid of every single person in central office except for those 3 people that you have to have. You wouldn't come up to $3.3 million. So there's no way to not have every single department affected. The cuts involve cutting a maintenance person FTE, cutting a technology FTE, cutting 2 administrative support FTEs in central office. And as I've said, those people are bringing revenue. They file Medicaid, they do interest income, they handle grant applications, and make sure that we get all the money that we need from the state. One of them does the state reporting. One of the people does the state reporting in the central office. That's really important to make sure we get, even though we don't get a lot, to get every dollar from Chapter 70 that we're supposed to get. So just to say that someone isn't forward-facing to students doesn't mean that it's not exceptionally important to the district.
And I respect and understand that. I guess as a parent, when I see there was another slide here that kind of outlined each and every student cut that was going to be made, and as a parent in the district, as I'm sure other parents in this room probably feel that, is that's what sticks out to me personally, because one of the reasons we moved to this town in the first place was because of the quality of schools. And once we start doing cuts like this inside of the classroom, what effect is that going to have?
It's good. That's why I said both gentlemen, the town managers talked about what it's going to be devastating for their towns. It's going to be devastating to the schools. You can't absorb the $1.9 million worth of cuts that we took last year and take $3.3 million on top of that. And last year, we did cut, and we cut an administrator last year. So we've been trying to, we'll get down to the point where there's one administrator in Middle School South, one administrator in Middle School North, and there's the principal. So one of the suggestions has been, we'll cut one of those administrators. And I will tell you then, that means that those people are the only people that do lunch duty. So if one of those people is sick, no one does lunch duty in that building.
Can I just ask, there's no one behind me, I don't mean to take up too much time, but
That's
I,
okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I'm done then, go ahead.
Yes, on behalf of the school committee, Mr. LeBlanc. As a member, I need you to use a microphone, though. For the Groton-Dunstable School Committee, doesn't matter, whichever one you want.
So my name is Brian LeBlanc. I'm a member of the school committee. And with regard to the last comment, I'd just like to say that, if we do have to go down the path of reducing the budget, the process would be similar to the way that we've done it in the past, in which the superintendent makes recommendations to the school committee. Ultimately, it's the school committee's decision on where to make the reductions, but we do try to listen to the superintendent's recommendations. And I think it's important to keep in mind, as the superintendent pointed out, that it's not, just because someone works face-to-face with a student versus someone who does not work face-to-face with a student, that does not automatically imply the value that they provide to the school district, and that people who work face-to-face with students are the most important people. Everyone who works in this district and works here is important. We wouldn't have people here if they were not delivering value to the school district.
Right, and again, I just want to state that I don't mean to underestimate the impact that this would have to students, because the detail, and if you look at the presentation from 214, talks about that we would be cutting 3 reading interventionists, that we'd be cutting 0.4 math interventionists, that we'd be cutting at least 1 special education teacher at every building, that we'd be cutting a counselor at the middle school. None of this, no matter whether it's central office or it's the people in the buildings, none of this is going to have a positive effect on students.
Mr. Prest.
My name is Linwood Prest. I live on 11 Highland Road in Groton, and I'm speaking for the elderly people because I'm one of them at 87 years old. I do own a home, and I suspect a lot of other elderly ones live and have their home. And you all know that we've had a tremendous increase in costs for living. And we're struggling trying to even stay in our homes. And so what I'm asking is, if you pass the override, are you going to give the elderly any benefits whatsoever in that kind of tax increases that you need? And you've made a big case for needing it.
Mr. Haddad?
Thank you. In terms, it's very difficult to segregate out how taxes get assessed. Property values are assessed, and then that's how the tax rate is set, and then people have to pay the taxes. We do have abatement programs for seniors. Our treasurer has started a TREAD program that's raising money privately to help offset, if people apply for it, to help offset costs of increase in taxes. And there's a program that I think we're looking at in terms of a senior abatement. If you want to address that, Megan, because you know better than I do. I'll defer to the Principal Assessor, Megan Foster. Thank you, Megan.
Hi, everyone. So there is, in the Municipal Empowerment Act, there is a option for us to adopt a senior means tested exemption. Right now, it's something we're looking into. If that doesn't pass through that, there's still a way that the town could adopt it and create that. So that is something that the Board of Assessors has started talking about, doing more research on. And so what it is, the senior means tested exemption would almost be similar to Massachusetts has a residential exemption for property owners who live in really vacation area towns, like down on the Cape, that if you own and occupy your property, you have a different tax rate than someone who owns property in town and uses it as an income generating property. It's very similar to that, where there would be a application period for people to apply for the senior means tested exemption. It then would essentially, we would look at a distribution of those who would qualify for the senior means tested exemption would receive a lower tax rate almost, and the shift of the burden would then go to those who don't qualify for it. So it is something we're looking into, especially because our office, we handle all of our exemptions and abatement applications. Most of those are elderly, and so we are looking for ways on how we can help.
Thank you, Megan.
Is that all, Mr. Haddad? All right. Dr. Jennings.
Hi, Mary Jennings, 62 Blossom Lane. I want to thank you for your very clear presentation, and also thank both towns and the school district for spending a lot of time the last 20 years making sure that we had no override for our operating expenses. That is indeed amazing that we've gone 20 years without an override. The school district said that there's been a change in the state funding because of the local minimum contribution, because of the town's ability to pay. Could you speak to that a little bit? When did that change, and how does the state perceive our ability to pay? And I would like to ask the town something similar in a minute.
So it's based on the town's wealth and the average income and again, I don't compute it, but that's how the state uses information that they get off of our annual reporting, the town's annual reporting. So when they look at it, they determine a town's ability to pay, and then they look at the number of students that are enrolled, and it's multiplied that way. So when you have the population going up, like in Dunstable by a little bit, it'll drive that up higher, and then if the property values are higher and their average incomes are higher, it's going to result in a higher minimum required contribution. So that changes every year. It's not that their formula or their process changed, it's just that number changes every year.
So it's related to the worth of the real estate and the average household
That's my
income.
understanding,
Thank
yes.
you. So our income has been going up. And for Mark mentioned in his presentation also state funding, you said that it's because of the lack of consistent and appropriate funding from the Commonwealth. Could you tell us a little bit about what has changed in the funding from the Commonwealth?
No, absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's what the problem is. And if you see the number that's going up, our school district has averaged about $11 million in state aid over the years, and it counts for approximately 12% of their operating expenses, and it's not increasing at the same level that their operating expenses are going up. So as their operating expenses go up, the amount of state aid that's covering that shrinks, which puts a larger burden on the towns of Groton and Dunstable to cover that. So when I say lack of consistent state aid, it's because we are getting nothing from them. 0.34% per year for the last 10 years is ridiculous. And no matter what we say, and then I hear from our legislators that the Groton-Dunstable Regional School District is being held harmless. I don't know what they're being held harmless from, because they're being harmed by not getting more aid, and it's harming the towns of Groton and Dunstable. So that's my feeling on that. Jason, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, other than in Dunstable, it's only 3% of our overall revenue stream to begin with. So it's not a huge number for us. It's like, I think this year it's 380, I want to say. Yeah, so it's not a significant. I don't want to say, hey, I'll take whatever they'll give me, but it's not a huge revenue stream for the town of Dunstable. It's 3% of our overall revenue. We're seeing about 3% increase this year.
So I understand then it's this lack of increase in state aid, or in fact reduction in state aid for the district, and then that gets passed on to the assessment to the towns.
Yes.
That's part of it, and then the increases we're seeing in state aid aren't keeping up with our expenditure increases as well.
So if I can just say, Chapter 70 is the funding we get from the school, from the state, and in FY19, our Chapter 70 money went up by 0.66%. The next year was 0.65. In FY20, it was 0% increase. FY22 went up 0.61, and the last year that they have the records on file are 1.25. It went up. Just to give you a comparison speaking, in the same year, Linfield went up 6.4, Littleton 5.83, and Chelmsford 5.39. So we're not seeing the increases in Chapter 70. Usually we get somewhere between $30 a student. So that multiply that by 2375, and that's the increase we're seeing in Chapter 70. So it doesn't, as people have said, it doesn't go up anywhere close to the rate that our expenses go up.
One of the, if I may,
Go ahead.
Jason, just one last thing to follow up on that question. One of the things that we've been working very closely with our state delegation. We had a meeting here between Groton and Dunstable Regional School District officials and our state delegation. Senator Cronin, Senator Kennedy, Representative Scarsdale, Representative Senna came out, and they know the burden and the trouble that we're going through, and they want to work with us. I've had several conversations with Senator Cronin since that time. We're trying to work with the MMA to try to figure out how we can approach the state and come up with a way to get something done, but it's just a very difficult thing to do. But I'm glad you asked that question, Mary.
Yes, sir.
Yes, hi, Jim Barrasano, Longley Road. I noticed early on in the presentation that there is a municipal fee charged for meals in town. Is that true? That there's a sum that goes to
Yeah, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts allows municipalities, if town meeting adopts it, which the Groton Town Meeting did, to charge a 0.75% tax on meals in Groton, not alcohol, just food. So we collect approximately $250,000 a year in that tax based on our restaurants. And the Municipal Empowerment Act that Megan mentioned earlier, there is a provision in there which will allow, if it passes and town meeting adopts it, to increase that from 0.75 to 1%. So there is a potential to take more money in the meals tax revenue as well.
I see. Well, what I'm leading up to is that we're blessed in that we have two terrific preparatory schools in town, Lawrence Academy and Groton School, and, of course, Groton Hill. Has there ever been a consideration of charging a small fee? I mean, we take care of them with the fire and police, et cetera. As a small fee to the actual parents of the students rather than to the schools themselves. You know, there are people coming from all over the country to go to these schools and all over the world, and they pay a significant amount of money to go to these schools. So to tack on 5% or whatever it might be to balance our budget, I think would make some sense.
I wish it was that. I wish it was that simple. We work very closely with Lawrence Academy, Groton School, and Groton Hill Music. They have been increasing their pilot payments over time, but they're not required to do that. They don't have to pay us anything if they don't want to. So we do work very closely with them. The Groton School, since I've been here as town manager, have increased their pilot from $100,000 to $240,000 over that time period. Lawrence Academy has increased theirs from $30,000 to $75,000. And the new Groton Hill Music Center has a tax or a surcharge that they place on tickets, $2 a ticket that they sell, and they call that the Groton Community Fund, and they've returned over $65,000 over the last year to the town. So we are working with them, and we are trying to come up with money, but we have to be very, we want to work closely with them, we want to work cooperatively with them, but we have no mechanism to do what you suggest. I would love to be able to do that, but there's just no mechanism in state law that allows us to do that.
My thought was not the schools themselves, but the students and their parents, and that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, we still need a mechanism to do that, and there's no provision in state law that would allow that. We have to follow state law, but I like the way you're thinking. That's good.
Thanks.
Brian LeBlanc, Integrity Way, also a member of the school committee. I think that, in this particular budget cycle, we need to focus on the things that we can control. Chapter 70 not being one of those. I don't think we're going to get any changes in that law between now and the time we have to approve a budget. However, I think it is important just to keep in mind for greater context. I mean, we've talked about how it's worked for Groton and Dunstable, but just for greater context, for example, in the city of Gardner, which has an enrollment that was 2,700 students in fiscal year 2009 and went down to 2,284 in 2023, which is almost the same as ours. Their Chapter 78 has gone from $17 million up to $23 million. So they're getting $6 million more per year. And in Groton, we're getting $1.2 million more per year. At Wachusett Regional, it's gone from $19 to $32 million over the same time period. So there are other districts and there are other towns that are receiving significantly more money. It's not like the state is cutting money across the board. Just something to keep in mind when you're talking to your state legislators.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Larry Larson, Martins Pond Road. I just wanted to kind of tag along to what the gentleman said about the assessment on some of the private schools here in town, and also on your comment of how I'd like to have access to that. I did a little bit of research, and I'm not positive about this because I was, Googling and so forth. But the town of Andover has been taxing, they've been assessing the endowment of the Andover Academy for maybe 10 or 15 years. And I see figures out there of revenues back 700,000, 800,000, something like to that order. So the fact that they're doing it, it must mean that there is a mechanism for doing that.
If I may, the town of Andover negotiated that with Phillips Academy, so they do get that funding from them. My understanding is percentage-wise, the amount of money that the town of Andover gets from Phillips Academy is equal to the percentage that we get from Groton School. So it's very, very similar. I believe it's of the endowment. So I believe it's very similar, but the town of Andover worked out that deal with Phillips Academy, and I've been working very closely with Groton School trying to generate more revenue from them. And one of the things that the Groton School does do is if we need something for a special project, same with Lawrence Academy, we go to them, and they have helped us by writing, by giving us money when we need it. For example, I asked them for a new scoreboard for the new Florence Roach Elementary School to save money on that project. They wrote me a check for that. We needed equipment for the fire station. They wrote me a check for that. We needed help for engineering for sidewalks. They wrote a check for that. So there are, and when we wanted a school resource officer, they increased their pilot to cover a portion of the school resource, when we added the second school resource officer. So they do things to help us out. Obviously, everybody would like that to be more, and I know that's one of the things that the select board deals with on a regular basis from constituents asking them. We're trying our best, and Groton School and Lawrence Academy has stepped up to the plate. We would always want more.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate that, but I wanted to support the gentleman's comments. And also, there was, I think you had a committee in Dunstable to look at possible revenue increases. So it seemed like that would be something that would be a revenue increase that people would look at. And I know that, I don't know for a fact, but Harvard has a rather large endowment, and I'm sure they're paying the city of Cambridge something. Boston College, BU, I'm sure they're all contributing. So I think that there's pain being spread around through the whole town, the residents, the businesses, the schools, and I appreciate that and understand that, but maybe we need to include some of our schools that are doing quite well, and we're proud to have them here, obviously, but I think we need to take a look at ways to generate revenue without taxing the citizens. Thank you.
And gentleman's coming to the microphone. While it's a pause, I would just say for Groton voters, I will be holding office hours to answer any questions about town meeting procedure that you may have, and those will be March 13th from 6 to 8 p.m. and March 23rd from 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. at the Geld office. Yes, sir.
Hi, Andy George, Olivia Way. So I'm aware that in other states, the State Department of Education provides enrollment data going out 10 years, based on housing starts and some other factors. And online and in the presentation tonight, I didn't see any information about going out several years, what the student enrollment projection might be for Groton-Dunstable schools.
That's actually done when we applied for the MSBA. The Massachusetts School Building Authority does a projection based on enrollment, based on births. And what's difficult in a community like Groton and Dunstable is that it's not generally a first home family constituency. It's usually the second home or the third home. So, and why is that difficult? Well, because you can't project from births what the enrollment's going to be. So I would say that we look at 10 school districts that we compare ourselves to from 2012 to 2021. All of those school districts, with the exception of two, Bedford and Acton-Boxborough, saw a decline in enrollment. We're not the only ones. Yes, we have seen a decline of enrollment. We're about in the middle of the 10 school districts that we compare ourselves to. Bedford's increase was slightly, it's about 4%, and Acton-Boxborough's was quite large, but that's because there were two separate districts, Acton-Boxborough. So I would say that right now they're projecting that we're going to stay about the same. Now, at the time that they projected that, when we built Florence Roach, when we entered the building project, there were several things that have come online since then. So there's a housing project in Groton that's in the old, what's the name of that company?
Nebs.
Right, what everybody's saying. And I also know that there's a 40B housing project in Dunstable that's also taking effect. Those things were not in place when the MSBA did their estimation. So right now, Florence Roach is expected to have 645 students. That's the projection. And we're going to be just slightly below that, but we're going to be pretty much what they expected. And they do that projected on the next 20 years. So they were projecting at the time that building would stay the same. If these housing projects come to fruition, I would expect that we'll see some increase in enrollment.
Okay. Is there a place to access that online through the State Department of Ed or through the town?
Yep, if you go to the Department of Education website, which is doe.mass.edu, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see school and district profiles, and you can click on that, and you can see all the information that I'm giving you for every school district in the state of Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there other questions? Mr. Hatta, will these presentations be online?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. at grotonma.gov.
Correct.
Yes, ma'am.
Joan Simmons, Main Street, Dunstable. You know, we're doing the same thing in Dunstable. We're looking all around, trying to figure out where we can come up with some more revenue. And as Jason said, you know, we've got 3 new committees, you know, that are going to try to, you know, take a stab at it. But, and I've said this before, some of you are, I'm sure, sick of hearing it. But the elephant in the room here, folks, is the fact that the average tax bill in Dunstable is $9,000. I think I read somewhere that the average tax bill in Groton is a little over $10,000. Correct me if I'm wrong. It cost $22,000 to educate one child. Okay? So we have a problem here. And, you know, I'm not quite sure how to solve it, but, you know, it's in Dunstable where, you know, we want to sell open space, we want to, you know, bring in a bunch of development, we want to do all this stuff. Well, the folks that have kids in the system, okay, God bless them, you know, they need to contribute more. Unfortunately, the only way to get them to do that is with an override, but that taxes everybody else who you know, are on fixed income, the elderly, you know, people of lesser means. Okay, it's a difficult situation. But I told Jason, he laughs at me, that we need another committee to take donations, you know, from people who, you know, aren't paying their fair share. And I hate to put it like that, but that's exactly the, you know, what it comes down to. I have another question.
Only if you chair it, Jim.
What's that?
You have to chair the new committee.
Of course. Another question. I don't understand. Now, the town of Groton, projected revenue for 2025 is like almost $53 million. Is that correct?
The revenue for Groton?
Yes.
No.
Oh, okay. What was the $53 million number?
That's the
That was a school budget. That was a school budget. I wish my budget was $53 million.
No,
John, but
not
it's not.
your, no, just the revenue. You had some number up there that was 52 something or another for I believe for your budget or
No,
for the revenue that you have coming in for the town.
No, our projected revenue for next year in our level service budget is $45,179,000.
Okay. Well, that's even better, because I need somebody to explain to me how you can oversee the operation of a town of 11,000, almost 11,000 people, and the school district has to have $52 million to educate 2,350, you know, whatever kids. I mean, I'm having a hard time with that. So can anybody help me make sense of that?
I don't know that I can compare our budget to Mark's and to, because I don't know that that's comparing apples to apples. We have significantly more employees than the town does. But if I would call, and I know if I would call people's attention to our comparison that we did with the tri-board this summer, and we looked at every category that we have spent our money on, And I think I had this up almost the whole time that I was at the Dunstable town meeting, but it's slide number 49, and I'm happy to send that to you, Joan, if you don't want to look at the whole presentation. If you send me an email, I'll send you the slide. But when we look at the percentage of our major budget categories that are representative in our budget, and we look at our overall budget compared to the towns that we compare ourselves to, we are pretty much average with only one major exception, and that is benefits. It's been widely in the press that we pay 85% of health insurance. It is something that we are working on, but I can't comment on that. But it is something that we are working on right now because we're in the middle of negotiations. But that's all I can say about that. But if we look at the categories that we have and the dollar values that we spend and our overall per pupil expenditure, it took actually Groton until I believe it was 2019 before they even hit the median of the per pupil expenditure of the 10 towns that we compare ourselves to. And they are all different levels. I know that there has been some objection that some of the towns do have more money. Certainly Westwood does, but I don't know that Chelmsford has any more, Harvard, Littleton, certainly not Linfield. North Reading, those towns their ability to pay is not any greater than Groton and Dunstable. So I think that those per pupil expenditures are about the same. We're subject to, and actually we were just having a conversation tonight, we're subject to the same inflationary costs that others do. And one thing I want to bring your attention to is the chart that Sherry showed at the beginning, is that 85% of our budget, or 75% of our budget is salaries and benefits. And that makes it very difficult to impact what the budget is unless you are willing to accept less teachers and less support for students who may need support. That's the only way to hold that budget back. So for us that's why to reduce the budget, and the gentleman brought this up earlier tonight, to reduce the budget $3.3 million, it's exceptionally, especially with $1.9 million worth of cuts last year, it's exceptionally difficult to make those cuts with not getting rid of people, because 75% of the budget are staff. So I can't compare my budget against Mark's because we have way more, and I can't look at my enrollment versus the number of people he supports. But I will tell you that the cuts that are in his budget actually affects the school as well, because one of the things that we haven't talked about is that right now there's a projection that without the override, the SRO funding will be cut. That means that there will be no SROs for Groton-Dunstable Public Schools right now.
I think what it's also important to point out is that they may have 2,500 students, but they touch every student and they have to deal with every student. I have not dealt with 11,000 residents in my 15 years in Groton, so I don't know if the comparison is fair. I understand what you're saying, but I don't think it's fair because they have to touch all 2,500 students on a daily basis. They have to feed them. They have to bring teachers in to teach them. They have to deal with behavior issues. We deal with behavior issues too in the police department. That is true. But for the most part, we do not have the same. You know what I'm saying, Joan? We don't have the same thing.
I do, but, still.
I understand what you're saying. I get your point.
You're still, supporting a system of almost 11,000 people and businesses and everything else that's going on. And it just doesn't make sense to me. One more comment about the state. I'm so tired of hearing about the state. We elect these people, or no, I don't elect them. But we elect these people and they turn around and they stick it to us. You've got to realize, what are they doing now? Our representative couldn't show up because they're working on some kind of a funding budget for immigrants. Okay, well, that's where your money's going. All right, that's where your money's going, and I'm sorry to say it, Nobody else will. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, you got to stop voting for these people, you know, when they don't have your best interest in heart. In Dunstable, you know, they want us to, well, we got to do affordable housing. And the next thing we'll do, you guys are an MBTA community. Oh my God. You know, if that comes to Dunstable, we're really screwed. It's something that the state is just, you know, they put the screws to you because they can. They hold funding over your head. And if you don't comply, look at Milton. You know, if you don't comply, you know, you're in trouble. So anyway, just think about it. Next time
thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Brian LeBlanc again. So I would just like to respond to a couple of Joan's comments. You know, I know that she mentioned how the average per pupil expenditure is far greater than the average tax bill in these towns. Well, I think if we go to any of the other 351 communities or whatever the number is in the state of Massachusetts, you're going to find that the numbers are exactly the same because that's just the way that our budgets and our societies function. And I think that, you know, I personally don't draw a lot of benefit other than this meeting, you know, from this building that we find ourselves in, the senior center, but I live in a community where I value this. I know that it delivers significant services to that particular group of citizens, and so I value it and I want to see it continue. I don't want to see it go away. And I'm particularly proud of the fact with this particular budget and process that we went through that we are all standing together and that it is a bundled override, and that's the way that the select board chose to put this together. We didn't pit one group against each other. The goal here is try to deliver level services for everyone because all of the different groups are equally important. There's no one group that's been said to be more sacred than the rest, and I just really appreciate that.
Mr. Cunningham.
Yeah, thank you. To follow up a little bit on one of Joan's points, I think we talk about the state and our representation and everything. The other thing, and the other white elephant in the room, is the Proposition 2.5. It was passed a number of years ago. Had a lot of support. Certainly, I think on some level it made sense because you want some limit or some control over how money is spent or how much taxes can be raised each year. But it is artificial in terms of the limits that it places on communities in trying to provide services, given the rate of inflation and given everything else. And it really fundamentally, that's something that needs to be changed. And that's the Holy Grail. And that's something a lot of legislators will not want to touch. But I think that momentum needs to come from, from us at this level, and then maybe working with legislators, get some movement on that, because it's simply, it's sort of an artificial constraint on what communities can do. And it also limits other things too that can't get done. So that's one of the things that's really driving this. And I think that's something that we found when we were going through our budget process.
Do any of the panelists want to comment on that?
I agree with everything Mr. Cunningham just said.
Is there?
I won't take very long.
Okay.
Proposition 2.5. God bless Proposition 2.5. If we didn't have Proposition 2.5, the towns would be doing to us exactly what the school district is doing to us. Okay? And that's the reason it was established in the first place, to make sure that any big increases, any large amounts of money that the town wants to bill you for, you have to approve. Okay? That's it.
Yes, sir.
Hi, good evening. Ryan McLean. I live in Dunstable and Alexander Way. So I believe in the school system. I believe that we need to invest in the school system. My wife's on the PTO. If you guys aren't signed up for the Swallow Union PTO trivia night, then you're not helping to fund the teachers and the firefighters. I also think to speak to the municipal services level, having one firefighter on duty during the day is not good for the overall health of the community, for our senior population. We need to invest in our town side as well. The things I hear, though, if you look at the graphs, the the biggest hurdle, I think most of the people in this room have already decided how they're going to vote. It's the people who are looking at the long-term impact of that in Dunstable $2,700. The thing I think we need to get this over the hump is more of a long-term look. I want to blame the state too. I want to blame other people, but what are we going to do? So some of the comments of the people I've talked to relate specifically to the school committee's commitment to a long-term control of the budget. So some of the comments I've heard are there's no incentive to cut while the override is pending. The school committee won't keep to that number, that a 7% increase is not sustainable, right? And I don't believe these things are true, but that is what the community is saying. So how do you answer that? I'm begging the school committee to help us get this override over the finish line. And I think you can do that by demonstrating some long-term commitment to controlling spending in these next 2 to 3 years to allow this override to last longer than 2 to 3 years. I don't think this means lowering the override or changing the number or changing our investment in the school. I think it means controlling that initial investment in year one so that this school override and town override lasts longer. So it does mean voting the FY25 budget lower, but not the overall investment in our community. So I like to give examples. So PFAS mitigation is going to be controlled, I understand, by the new water system. So you could use one-time funds to fund that and not add it to the operating budget. If you remove the new positions that were added, right, like adding a maintenance position is increasing services. It's not level services. So if you held those positions, took them out of the budget, and allowed the new superintendent to come in and do cost-saving measures, that'd be $200,000 to $300,000 you take out of the budget. If you hold the kindergarten decision for 3 years, again, another $100,000 to $200,000 out of the budget for FY25. So these aren't huge changes. You're talking about $500,000 to $600,000 in FY25. But if you compound that over 3 to 5 years, you'll see a reduction in year one of the average tax bill in Dunstable by $100, $70 to $100. That's a commitment. It's a commitment to saying this override, which is historic, would last longer than 3 years, not just 2 to 3 years, and then we're in the same boat again. I think that type of commitment from the school committee to the long-term costs and spending would allow the average voter in Dunstable to say we're going to pass this. So I'm begging the school committee to consider it. Thank you.
Can I just state that
Yes.
that was one of the things that Mr. McLean referred to actually was shown on the slide tonight and has changed since the Dunstable presentation, and that is that the only 2 positions that will be actually posted and hired for before the end of the fiscal year will be the ELL person and the behavioral interventionist, and those FTEs will be exchanged for FTEs that are currently in the budget this year. The people have left those positions, and so they would not be additions to the budget for next year, and that the remaining positions and those 2 positions that we're exchanging for the positions this year would be left to the new superintendent to determine at the end of the fiscal year and looking at data at the beginning of his term about whether he feels that those positions, that he would make a recommendation to the school committee that those positions be filled or not. So I believe that that is one of the ways that the school district has demonstrated, along with what we talked about earlier, the $1.4 million that was cut before we even went with an override number, and also the commitment that we made to Jason, who came to us and asked us not to change his assessment, even though there was a change by the state and local minimum contribution. We made some reductions here and there throughout the budget to do that. So I feel like my recommendation to the school committee has demonstrated to the largest extent possible the commitment to stay within the budget.
Mr. Barasano.
Yes, hi again, Jim Barasano, Longley Road. I did a little noodling while I was sitting there, and the students over at the Lawrence Academy, they pay $75,000. We have a budget of about $22,000. The students over at the Groton School pay around $60,000. Now, if every parent was charged a 5% fee, and where there's a will, there's a way for the town to do this, we would raise well over $2.6 million. At 3%, we would, lo and behold, be able to cover the entire deficit, approximately $1.6 million. So I think it'd be worth spending some time and energy looking into it. And I know they do a lot for the community, and it's great having them here. And I love the fact that they're here. It really adds a lot of power to the community. But the parents who bring their kids here have the resources, and I think that they would be more than happy to pay a small fee. I happen to be a big fan of Martha's Vineyard, and I get the Gazette every week, and they years ago instituted a municipal tax on property transfers, and with that money they buy open land on the island. And they're having done that, I think that is a possible way for Groton to do the same. And so I'd like to ask Mark and the folks to at least look into it and let us know what the possibilities are. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Rayner?
Faye Rayner, Groton resident, chair of the school committee. So Ryan, I'm not sure if you're asking for a response, but I will respond. And I don't know whether to look this way or this way. But maybe I'll be sideways. But inevitably, yes, you're right. Well, we have committed and said that we will stay within the override budget. What that looks like over the next 3 years, I'm not sure. What options we have relative to your suggestions or any suggestions, I don't know. But don't think that the work of this committee has stopped and that we won't continue as we have this year, working diligently with all the various different towns and boards to continue the work that we've done this year and look at those opportunities. That includes grants. That includes creative financing options. That includes sitting down with our new superintendent, who comes with a different perspective than our current superintendent, of which both are completely valid, and see if, he's got a few tricks up his sleeve. He's learned something from his, many years of being superintendents in the school system of what we can do. Absolutely. Part of the entry plan with the superintendent that we need to have a conversation around. So yes, I hear everything you're saying. Yes, we are absolutely going to do our best. Yes, please send any suggestions in. Anything is possible. Anything can be considered, but we still have work to do. Vote on what? Vote what into existence?
Hang on.
Vote what into existence?
Let's move along.
Ben Mahan, Dunstable. I just have one question. I've been to a lot of these. I think there's a question about the school's projected a 5-year budget. Is that true? Is that the school committee's done like a 5-year?
We have a
5 years. So where are the other 2 years? Like, it's 5 years. You're asking me to vote on 3. So as a voter, what does the other 2 years look like that I am not being told about right now?
Well, no, we always have in our budget book. As a matter of fact, it's in our budget book. We have a 5-year projection in the budget book. So if you go online to the budget book.
So does it mean, does this override of the 3 years, will it work for the next 2, the 5 too? You would have to know that number now, is that if we vote on the override today, does that next 2 years, does it pay itself out?
There's a number of factors that, as I said, I've already talked about with the fact that we originally had positions in the budget that we're setting aside to leave it for the new superintendent. If that superintendent decides that those positions aren't necessary, that will stretch the override further. If there are things that happen in negotiations that affect what we currently have in plan in place, that would stretch the override further. If we're able to get some additional funding through the insurance increase doesn't come back as much as we want it, that would stretch the override further. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're not, if there were savings that we realized, those would stretch the override further. They would not be it wouldn't be like, great, we have this $350,000 extra, we're going to raise the budget $350,000.
I'm just wondering, what is the projected budget for 28 and 29? You guys have it, I think, because you say it's a 5-year budget. I'm just trying to see what that number, just the number is that's going to be said for those years.
So the number currently, but that doesn't mean that that's the number, because as I said, there may be savings or revenues that we increase. But our 5-year projection is $60,687,932.22. So on page
20, so from 29 to 20, from 27 to 28, how much more?
That's the 28. That's the 28.
And that's how much more the year? Just so I can understand that.
over the next 5 years, it's it's an average of a $2 million increase per
Every
year.
year.
Yes.
That's all. Thank you very much.
Jason, can I just
Yeah,
say,
Mr.
I appreciate the question that you're asking, and we had a lot of debate in Groton on whether or not to look for 5 years or 3 years or 2 years or 1 year, and we decided that 3 year was the easiest thing to project as close as possible to reality based on previous trends. Going out to 5 years is very difficult. So the Finance Committee and the Select Board in Groton made a decision that they did not want to look at 5 years because it was just too many variables that we just couldn't be sure of, and we didn't want to go for something that we weren't confident on. So the Finance Committee directed me to come up with a 3 year. The Select Board and the Finance Committee directed me to come up with a 3 year, and we're pretty confident on that 3 year number. When you get to the fourth and fifth year, it just gets a little difficult.
Right.
But I appreciate your I understand why you asked the question.
And can I just also add that one of the reasons that 3 years is we agree with the towns that 3 years is the right thing is because we're in currently negotiating a contract. That contract will be for 3 years. So we can make a promise that, we can make a commitment to what that is in year 4 and 5, but we have every single one of our bargaining units is up for negotiations. So it would be, while we have a 5 year projection, we always have a 5 year projection. We need to try, as we've said before. I've actually worked in the town of Arlington twice. I had an override, a 5 year override that went 7 years, and a 3 year override that went 5 or 6 years. But the way that happens is you work very hard to decrease expenses if possible, but also to increase revenues if possible. And because of additions to the school district, the Chapter 70 money went up. If the two facilities open up that we're talking about, new housing, they could do a couple things. First of all, you can certainly your Chapter 70 goes up, but if you have 40B housing, likely your Title I portional and probably your Title III probably also, which comes from the federal government, will also change because it's based on the percentage of your students that are low socioeconomic status. When I first came here 7 years ago, we were at 6%. We're at about 10% now. So if you open up 40B housing, you're probably going to have a slight increase in that, which will make a slight increase. But as we've said before, every increase helps, right?
In the back,
Could
yes,
I-
ma'am. Yeah, sorry, Mr. Silva.
Thank you. Just one real quick point. We see revenue growth. We went over it. Our revenue growth is 3.5%. Anything more than 3.5%, 4%, maybe 4.5%, you're stretching it. It's money we don't have. So just to give you, just to be transparent about that, to give you parameters on the town of Dunstable spending, between 3.5% and 4.5% is probably where we need to be from a expenditure growth standpoint year over year. Anything more than that on our expense growth is more than what we have in revenue.
Okay. Now to the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Kristen Franco, Groton resident. Since Ryan did a Dunstable promo, I'm going to say Florence Roche is having a play on Friday evening and Saturday afternoon, Pirates of Penzance. If anyone would like to buy tickets, there are discounted senior citizen tickets as well. But back to the question and subject, the play does remind me that we are a community, and unfortunately right now this puts us in a very stressful situation that almost pits us against each other. But I would hope that everybody in this room, besides agreeing that none of us want to pay higher taxes, we do all want to live in a community where we support each other, we support our children, we support our elderly citizens, and that we are going to have to work together to get there, and it is going to be uncomfortable. And I don't have a great answer for that, but I hope we want to make these communities places where families from young age to old age all want to continue to live. And I'm worried that with these cuts to the town and the schools that will not be the case. And so some of the questions were around the school committee making a commitment to staying on budget. We've heard Dunstable talk a little bit about their plans for generating revenue. In Groton, I know we have things like Destination Groton, but do we have any concrete plans of how we're not going to be sitting here 3 years from now having the same conversation?
That's a great question. We're constantly looking at ways to consolidate services. This year we took steps to move our dispatch to a regional dispatch. We're constantly looking at opportunities to do that. We have contract negotiations coming up with our unions. We're going to try to do our best to control costs through our negotiations as well. And we're always looking at regionalization options, and we will continue to do that. So, you know, like Dunstable's done a great job regionalizing some of their services this past year, and we would probably want to attempt to do the same. We will do the same things as well. So we're going to look at as many options as possible to try to do that. I can't give you any promises right now, but we are constantly reducing. You know, without being directed to, we cut down the way we staff our town hall, as I said earlier, over the last several years by reducing overhead where we could consolidate areas, and we will constantly continue to look at that and do our best to do that. So you have my commitment on that until the selectmen throw me out.
And then in the work that you and the school committee have been doing, we keep talking about this 3-year interval, and if the budget override doesn't pass, but again, we have this 3-year interval. Are we kicking the can down? So what is it going to look like 3 years from now if this does not pass? Like, what are our deficits going to look like?
Well, the chart that I put up at the beginning, you know, we're projecting over 3 years a $5.5 million budget deficit based on projections, based on health insurance increases, the assessment from the school district, our cost for pension, our cost for employees, our, you know, in those debt service and costs like that, we're projecting a $5.5 million deficit. You know, the municipal budget is $16 million or $17 million. If we have to take 40% of that $5 million and cut it out of our budget, you're cutting deep into services on the municipal side, and there's nothing we can do to stop that. If the tax revenue doesn't increase and we don't have the opportunity, we have no choice but to reduce services. And 80% of our budget is personnel. So 80% of our budget is going to be affected by that, and it's going to be a significant cut in services.
And has anybody, this will be my last question, I promise, has anybody tried to look at our forecast, so if the override doesn't pass, and I think it's having looked for 2.5 years before moving to Groton, that property values could decline if we have towns that do not have services, if we have towns that have poorly rated schools, if property values decrease, then your tax revenue decreases, or is that?
No. What happens is the levy limit is the levy limit regardless of what the property value is. The property value sets the tax rate based on the levy. So if the property values go up, the tax rate goes down because more value is paying into that money. If property values tank, the tax rate goes up. And then you get into a very dangerous situation where under Proposition 2.5, your tax rate can never be more than $25 a thousand. So if property values tank and the tax rate is forced to go up and you hit that 25 level, then you don't even get to collect the 2.5% growth in the levy each year because you're capped at $25 a thousand. I hope we never get there, but that's something that you have to take into consideration. Property values eventually could hurt your ability to raise taxes. So that's your Proposition 2.5 lesson of the day.
Thank you.
Ms. Pine, did you want to speak? I did. Sorry, Mr. Robertson.
Could I just make one comment on that?
Yes, Mr. Silva, please fill the gap.
The select board is looking at ways to generate revenue, but the options to generate revenue in Dunstable are really I think we acknowledge will be limited. So we're trying to get as creative and be as aggressive as possible, but no one thing in Dunstable, at least, is going to solve this problem. And we have done a lot this fiscal year to regionalize, but just to give you a sense of what that means financially for us. So the treasurer collector position, regionalizing that saved us $32,000 in that budget. And the town clerk position saved us about $15,000 annually in the town clerk budget. So while, I was psyched about that and I'm proud of that work, that's not going to solve the issue. That's not enough money we're saving to solve this problem. We're talking about a $2.1 million problem over 3 years right now. And through those efforts, we saved almost $50,000 annually. So just to give you a sense of that work, which I am proud of, but that work that we've done as a team and the actual financial savings, it just those type of efforts we really need to be aggressive in looking at. It's not going to be the solution to our problems alone. It's going to need to be a whole lot of things added up to make this problem disappear.
Okay, Ms. Pine.
So I wanted to go back to the suggestion that was made about it would be great if there was a way that seniors didn't have to pay as much in taxes. And pretty much as far as we understand, we don't have that way yet, although the program that Megan talked about sounds intriguing. But we do have one way in our community that we have set up to take care of seniors. That is the TREAD committee, which stands for Tax Relief for Elderly and Disabled. And the funding for that committee has come from donations. That is the mechanism that we have for people who can afford to contribute to this fund, which is then to be given out to people who are struggling with their taxes. So I know that it is not something that anyone wants to have to apply for. They just would prefer not to have to pay those taxes. But the way it is right now, you have to pay the taxes. But we do have a mechanism in Groton that we have set up precisely to help people who are struggling. And I thought of this when the young woman spoke about being a community that takes care of each other. This is an attempt we're doing to do that. We know this override is going to have potentially much more of an impact on people with fixed incomes. We are at least working to find some ways to alleviate that. Thank you.
Mr. Robertson.
Yeah, hopefully to close this thing out since it's going to be midnight.
Yeah.
I think we need to take a big picture look. We're here because certain things have all snowballed at the same time. We had COVID problems. COVID created inflation problems. We all remember last year we had a vote for the school override because inflation was 12%, more than the budget we put together the 1 year before that. So when you think where we are today, we're here because primarily with the level service brother, we have things like inflation, COVID, and a couple other oddball things. So when you look in the future, we have to have revenue equal expenses to get out of this thing. And we don't. We're way underwater right now. But I believe over 3 to 4 years, we have the opportunity to raise revenue via the things we've talked about tonight. And we also have the ability to reduce expenses. We have it for a couple of reasons. One is we can look at more efficiencies within the town, but we also have the fact that inflation has been was running at 9, then 7, now it's down to maybe 3.5 to 4. Probably will go down in history. Go back in time, we were running at 1, 1.5. At that point in time, we were balancing the budget, sometimes with magic, sometimes without magic, but we still balanced the budget. This world of just everything going wrong at the same time has created this issue. So I think if we think about, let's figure out how we get there in 3 to 4 years to try to balance this budget, bring down the expenses, bring up the revenue, and we'll see how we get there. If we don't pass this override, the first year cut is bad, the second year cut is worse, the third year cut's even worse, because now you're getting into the bone of you cut through the flesh, the muscle, and then the bone. We're going to have nothing left in this town. If you think about that 3 years out, we're going to have the municipal budget will have to be cut by more than 10% of the people. The school, 30 to 50 people, that's another more than 10%. You can't get there from here if you don't pass the override, because you're going to cut. And then you get the whole structure of the town is going to start not being the kind of town you want to live in. So you pass the override, you take the commitment, we're going to balance it by the 4th year and 5th year, maybe get close, but you're certainly going to be a lot closer than if you just cut this thing. So you've got to take that commitment. I'm sure the goals, select board could put on their goals, right, Allison? One of the goals is balance this budget 3 to 5 years, working with the school, and figure out how we do those two things. But you got to pass the override to get there, because if you don't, it's just going to become a spiral of just cut, and everything's going to be taken out, and you're still not there. So I say pass the override, work on the getting there with the team, working on a 3 to 5 year plan on how you get this thing to balance. Revenue equals expenses. And with that, let's go home.
But you're supposed to drop the mic.
There's no vote after this debate tonight, but we'll keep going as long as you have questions. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Matt Dallas. I'm a Groton resident on Lowell Road. I wanted to comment about the proposals about closing down the Boutwell School and selling that building. My son has been a student at Boutwell. It's been a really great environment for him. I think part of that is because it's its own separate, smaller building where they can have a better environment for smaller kids that's less overwhelming for a lot of the kids. It is also an integrated preschool with a larger population of the kids there being special needs that need a more controlled environment that's better to be separated from the rest of the schools so they can stop the kids from being so sensorily overwhelmed. And it's also part of the proposal had been to get rid of the administration assistant staff at Boutwell, and it's been very nice to be able to call Boutwell to the front desk and have somebody there that's just for Boutwell that knows all the kids, be able to talk to her about how he's doing at this school. I know that also if they sell that building, it's just going to be the one-time income, and then a couple years down the road, there's going to be a situation where they need extra room and going to have to rent trailers, and it's going to cost a lot more money in the future, just like a lot of the decisions that have been made in the past that are causing us to have to pay a lot more money now, like how the town could have replaced Florence Roche 20 years ago when materials were a lot less expensive. They didn't, and then had to replace Florence Roche now after spending another 20 years in maintenance costs, taping a 70-year-old building back together. The town could have hooked up the school to the town water a long time ago, saved a bunch of money on the PFAS. So we're in another situation where we could save some money now and get burned and have to pay a lot more money down the road in the future and be in an even worse situation, or spend some more money now and take care of things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any comment on that? If not, Mr. Francesco.
Yeah, just a quick comment on the question about raising additional revenues in town and the Dunstable plan on the 3 different committees that you're forming or have formed. One thing I would urge Groton citizens to participate in is the master plan process. I'm on the planning board. We're in the middle of the master plan process, and part of that is how do we create a more vibrant economic zone for the town so that we start to have more smaller businesses and family-owned businesses and other sorts of revenue-generating solutions that start to show up in town. And that runs sort of hand in glove with the efforts that Destination Groton is trying to achieve as well. So for those of you who haven't tuned in to the fact that a master plan process is underway, I urge you to take a look at the information that's on the main page at the town website and engage with the master plan, and then hold people's feet to the fire once that master plan is written. It's going to be finished up at the end of this year. Hold people's feet to the fire to actually execute on it so that we actually follow through on the things that get written in that master plan. Thanks.
One more? Yes, ma'am.
Hi there. I'm Rebecca Wexner. I'm a Groton resident. I was actually just wondering, just listening to some of the questions in the comments, I'm actually curious about what this looks like for the municipal services and the school over time, right? We talked about the reductions that are going to be happening over the next 1 to 3 years and the impact that will have in that period of time. But I'm really interested in what happens longer term, because this seems to be a bit of a turning point in the kinds of services that are being delivered across the town and the school district. And it feels a little bit like that would be a hard place to turn back from once we go around that corner. And so I'm just curious if you all would be able to speak a little bit to the longer term implications of not being able to fully fund the town.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think Bud really did a good job explaining that. The cuts would snowball, and I will tell you, Tom Delaney, our Public Works Director, has been with us for 40 years, and he was talking about cuts that happened back in the 80s, and he didn't get those positions back until 2016 or 18. So once you start cutting, and I know Jason's going through the same thing, and the school district, Laura had something up on the screen as well as cuts that happened back in 2003. Once you make cuts and the revenue doesn't increase, it's impossible to put those positions back into the budget. It took the highway department 20 years, 30 years to get back to the level that they were in the 80s. So to answer that question, I think Bud brought up a very good point. It's just going to continue to spiral and snowball out of control if we don't do something now to stop it and allow us to do planning over the next 3 to 5 years to sort of level things off and get to the point that Jason was making about getting the revenue and the expenses equal. And I think that's what we have to do. I hope that answers what you're asking. I don't know, Jason, if there's something you want to add to that.
I'd just say this, that I think these type of decisions and discussions are just simply about what you all want from your local government and what you expect from your local government. And if you want, in Dunstable, if you want public safety departments that are staffed the way they are now, with only one police officer overnight and only one firefighter on during the day, then don't vote for the override. That's a value judgment that the community needs to make. For my money, I don't think that's safe for the community and for the employees. And if you want town hall staffed the way it is right now, which is extraordinarily limited, if you want a functioning town hall, we're going to need the override. If you want a highway department that is already small, but the way it's staffed now to be able to maintain our roads and dams and culverts, then we need the override. I mean, that's the decision right now. If you want a school district, if you want the school district to be able to perform the way they are right now and to give the level of education they're given right now, the override's necessary. So to predict the 4 or 5 years without knowing what the growth numbers are going to be exactly is very, very hard. But I do know that without additional revenues, this next 3 years, the fourth and fifth year, it has serious impacts on the municipal side of the budget and the school side of the budget.
If I can just add, so Mark alluded to the slide that we saw before. So in 2003, 2004, there were no certified librarians in the district. It took us until my first year here, which is 7 years ago, for us to get certified librarians back in all the schools. We currently have 7 reading interventionists, and yes, we were able to add those because of the CARES and the ESSER money. However, they were gainfully employed, and yes, they were probably more gainfully employed because of COVID and the fact that kids were out of school, but they were also gainfully employed because we had kids that needed to get reading support. Right now, we're projecting that we'll have to cut 3 of those, maybe 3.5 of those positions. We're at pre-pandemic levels, and actually 20 to 21% of students need reading intervention in K1 and 2 is pretty much what I've come to expect in the 6 districts in 3 states I've worked in. So we're there now, but if we have to cut 3 reading interventionists, if we have to cut an SLP, a PT, an OT, if we have to cut counselors in all the schools when our Care Solace numbers, which is our referral system for families that need assistance, for students that have mental and behavioral health problems, I don't even want to think of what that's going to look like in 5 years. We're already losing staff. We're already losing staff because they are getting nervous that their jobs will not be protected, and they're getting offers, especially in special education. We lost a special education team chair this week. They're getting offers from other districts are seeing that we have qualified staff, and they're making them offers, and they're already leaving. I can't tell you how many people have approached the assistant superintendent and myself about writing a letter of recommendation. People are going to be nervous, and whether the override passes or not, we will lose staff because they will be nervous and they will go someplace else. And that's a shame because it's taken us, it wasn't until probably my 3rd year here that we replaced all the people. We brought all the curriculum coordination back that we brought, which is going to be critically important if the state passes the early literacy law. We're cutting our K through 4 curriculum coordinator for early literacy if the override does not pass. And then we'll not only have that person not be able to head off what's going to happen if the state law passes, but we're going to be forced to spend between $400,000 and $500,000 on an ELA program that's demanded by the state.
Sorry, the motion to move the question doesn't apply to this meeting. Go ahead, Ms. Mannion.
So I'm Allison Manugian. I'm currently a member of the Select Board. And I want to go back in time and kind of echo what Laura is saying. I was elected to the school committee in 2008. In that same year, I believe, an override, certainly in Groton, failed. In the next 7 years, 8 years while I was on the school committee, virtually until Laura kind of came in the year that I left, we had 5 superintendents. We had 5 business managers. We had no ability to do anything because we spent an entire 5 years saying, oh, it's a new person. We have to give them a time to acclimate. Oh, they've given notice. Oh, they're leaving. We're doing a search. The amount of churn that there could be, we would make no progress. And I'm just really concerned that the failure to pass an override combined with the expectations that the community has of these employees, of the district, of the municipality, creates a huge disconnect. And when you ask people to do the impossible, they're going to fail, and we're all going to fail with them. So let's not repeat what we did 15 years ago. It didn't work then, it's not going to work now.
Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight and for your attention. We have one more piece of business. The Groton Select Board needs to adjourn.
We're adjourned.
The school committee and the Dunstable Selectmen adjourned.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jason.
very much.
Thank you.
A reminder that town meeting in both towns is March 26th, and then the special election in Groton for the override and the election in Dunstable is also April 2nd.